This afternoon's sharing is Sutta Study on two kinds of thought. This is a very well-known sutra from the Majjhima Nikaya, Sutra number 19, Dvedhāvitakka Sutta. I will explain a little bit about this Nikaya and the Sutra and the meaning of all this in a moment. Right? Today's sharing is based on the translation by my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punnaji, which I will explain a little bit about his translation. Okay. So for those of you, who would like to join us to follow through in detail, there is a document you can download. It is the document containing the actual sutra. You can follow and you can actually jot some notes along with it. Go to the link tiny.cc/MN19-Punnaji, and you should be able to download the sutra from this link. Right. What I'll cover today, I'll just go through quickly an introduction of the term sutra. Now, some of you may have heard it spelled with a T-R-A. Some of you would have heard it spelled with a T-T-A, okay? Sutra is Sanskrit. Sutta is Pali. They both mean exactly the same thing. And this word refers to either a sermon or a collection of profound verses or statements of principle passed down through oral transmission of teachings by the Buddha or his chief disciples, and then later transcribed into written text as the Pali Canon in the 1st century BC, and then it was also transcribed into Sanskrit Agama. So that is actually the meaning of the word sutra, right? It is a sermon or a collection of profound verses or statements of principle from the teachings of the Buddha or his chief disciple. Mostly from the Buddha, but from time to time, the Buddha designate his chief disciples to deliver some of these sutras. Okay. Passed down through oral transmission, and the Buddha or his chief disciples transcribed into written text. Now, the collection of written text in the Theravadan tradition is called the Pali Canon. Right? It's called Pali Canon because it's originally transcribed into Pali. Subsequently, in recent years, maybe 200 years ago, they started to translate it into English. But before that, English text, the English translation of Pali Canon was not available before that. So people had to learn Pali. And basically, it's a very difficult language to learn. Just a quick word about Pali. It is a language that is no longer in use, no longer spoken or even written in terms of communication. It is basically a language which came from ancient times, and they only refer to the original transcription of the teachings into Pali, and that was the only thing. Today, nobody actually uses Pali either in spoken form or written form to communicate. Right? Thousands of these sutras, now there's no clear indication exactly how many. There were numbers mentioned, 8,000, 20,000, so nobody can say definitely how many there were. So I guess the number would be anything between 8,000 to 20,000 sutras are compiled into 5 major books or volume. And these books are called Nikayas that make up the Tipitaka. The Tipitaka is referring to a set of 3 baskets of teachings of the Buddha. Okay. So sutras are compiled into these 5 Nikayas. In the Theravadan Tipitaka, now I will not explain any more about other traditions. I'm only basically up to this point familiar with the Theravadan tradition. So in the Theravadan Tipitaka, the 3 baskets in the Theravadan tradition, There is firstly the Sutta Pitaka, which means it is a collection of the sutras, discourses and sermons of the Buddha, including his chief disciples, organized into these 5 Nikayas. And then the second part, the second basket, is the Vinaya Pitaka, which is basically a collection of disciplines dealing with monastic rules or discipline that the Buddha basically instructed how the monks should behave and what kind of rules govern the way they live and the way they progress through their daily activities. This is basically intended mainly for the monks, but inside the Vinaya Pitaka, there are also some sermons which can be very helpful to the layperson. And the third basket, which came subsequently later, a few hundred years later, they were then added in, is the Abhidhamma Pitaka. This was not in the original set. The original, the first set of teachings that were transcribed is only the Sutra and the Vinaya. Abhidhamma came later, a few hundred years later. And this is the treatise that analyzes the Buddhist doctrines, particularly about mind, also known as systematic philosophy. So this is like the philosophy and psychology of Buddhism. So what we're going to deal with mainly is this Sutta Pitaka, and we're going to refer to sermons inside there. And it is organized into 5 Nikayas. And what are these 5 Nikayas? First, there is this Digha Nikaya. This is the collection of very long discourses. These discourses, if you print out the translation, it can be 10, 20, even 30 pages long. So they're quite lengthy. And for newcomers, people who want to first study the sutras, I would not recommend anyone to start looking at the Digha Nikaya because it's just too long, and many of the texts in there can be quite deep, so it's not recommended. What I would recommend, however, is the Majjhima Nikaya. Majjhima Nikaya is a collection of middle-length discourses. That means they can be anything from 3 to 5 or 6 pages long, and that's it. Quite easy to follow if it is just only 3 to 5 pages long. It's a collection of middle-length discourses, and that's where we are drawing our sutra today. And also next Saturday, we do this also from the Majjhima Nikaya. Basically, most of the sutra studies done by many teachers or many monks or speakers, they like to draw the sutras from Majjhima Nikaya because they are much more simpler and not so deep, as well as the fact that they are not so long. They are between 3 to 5 pages, so it's easy to follow. And then there is the Samyutta Nikaya. This is a collection of thematically linked or topical discourses. Basically, there's based on certain topics. So when under a certain topic, there will be several short discourses or short collection of sayings. So Samyutta Nikaya is basically quite short usually. They're normally not very long. Sometimes they can only be a few sentences or up to 1 or 2 pages. They are seldom very long. But unfortunately, they are not very strong teachings. So people normally refer to these only for discussion, but really when they do sutra study, most people draw from Majjhima Nikaya. Right? Then there is the Anguttara Nikaya, discourses grouped by content enumeration. That means when the Buddha spoke of certain teachings, and some of these teachings he mentioned a number. For instance, Eightfold Path, the Eightfold Way. So the number is 8. So you will be able to find it, and you will be able to look under the book of 8. So there are 11 books in there, the book of 1, book of 2, book of 3, right up to book of 11. So then depending on the number, like the 4 Noble Truths, that would be 4, right? So you will look at 4, the book of 4s. And some things are just the book of 1. When the Buddha speaks the one and only thing, and then when he goes on to say something, then that saying would go under the book of 1. So that's Anguttara Nikaya. And finally, there is this Khuddaka Nikaya. This is basically a collection of various teachings which do not fit into any one of the above four. So it's just compiled into various books in there. Depending on which tradition, in which Theravadan tradition, if you go to Thailand, you go to Sri Lanka or India, there will be 15 books. But in Myanmar, then there are 18 books. So I'm not sure the big difference. I never study into the details how these are different. So the Khuddaka Nikaya originally was meant to be the minor collection. Little things that did not fit in the top four, then they put it into this Khuddaka Nikaya. Originally, there were only 6 to 8 books, and they were very simple stuff. But over the centuries, subsequently updated with later day editions. That means over the centuries since the time of the Buddha, even until a couple of hundred years ago, a lot of senior scholars or monks, scholar monks, were adding things to it and passing it down. So Khuddaka Nikaya actually is now amongst the largest collection because it is passed down from centuries of editions. So that Nikaya had become very large. So much for the Nikayas. We're going to focus mainly on in this Majjhima Nikaya. Okay. Today we're going to cover Majjhima Nikaya, Sutra number 19. Now they are abbreviated in this way. Majjhima Nikaya is MN. Okay, I'll just go back one page, and then you can see. Right, Digha Nikaya normally is DN followed by a number, which means it's the discourse number. MN followed by a number, or SN followed by a number in capital letters, right? And then AN. Whereas in Khuddaka Nikaya, then it depends on the book, and the lettering would depend on those various books. So today we're going to look at MN19, Majjhima Nikaya, Sutra 19, Dvedhāvitakka Sutta, which means 2 kinds of thoughts. And we're going to use the translation by my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punnaji. There are several translations available. I will give you a link to Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation at the end of today's sharing, so you can actually compare. The translation by Bhikkhu Bodhi is more extensive. It would contain a lot more details, would be a bit longer. My teacher, however, simplified it and shortened the addition to leave out some of the more complex stuff which is not relevant to the actual topic. And somehow this discourse, there were a few things mentioned which are not directly related to the 2 kinds of thought. So my teacher, Venerable Dr. Punnaji, then took out those things. So it's a little bit shortened, but it still contained the essence of what the Buddha was trying to teach, 2 kinds of thought. And this is the simplified version, so it's easier to follow. And I will go through in details, word for word, in a moment. And I will also add in some practical steps, how we're going to achieve this. The whole purpose of this sutra is to teach people how to calm their mind. And with calming the mind, eventually it will lead to purification of the mind. So that's what we're going to cover today. So today is just about calming the mind using this sutra, 2 kinds of thoughts. So let's begin. If you take a look at the document, you will find the first sentence, always, all the sutras begin with this, thus have I heard. Basically, it's because the oral transmission was passed down generation after generation before it was transcribed. So it was only transcribed in the 1st century BC, which means it's about 400 years after the passing of the Buddha. Then only they put it into writing in Pali. And that is the birth of the Pali Canyon. So therefore, the first thing they do, they must declare that this is passed down from the people who first heard it. That's why they say, thus have I heard. So all sutras begin with this statement, thus have I heard. Because the word sutra comes from the root word sota. Sota in Pali means the ear. So it's referring to hearing of a discourse spoken by the Buddha or his chief disciples. That's why every sutra will begin with this, thus have I heard. And then it says, once the Blessed One was sojourning in Savatthi at the Jethavanarama, the Ananda Pitaka's monastery. Now, this is the most popular place where the Buddha stays. Most of the time, the Buddha travels around to different places, stays at different monasteries. But when he is finished with his traveling, he returns back to this Jethavanarama, or it is also called Jetha's Grove, okay, or the Jetha Monastery. And this is really commonly called Jetha's Grove, Jetha's Monastery, or Jethavanarama. Whatever it is, if you read through sutras, you will find the mention of these different variations of that location. So they are all referring to the same one, the main monastery where the Buddha resided, especially during the rainy seasons, the Vasa. So the Buddha would have stayed there most of the time, but he does stay in other places from time to time. And while there, the Blessed One addressed the bhikkhus. Now, the word bhikkhus simply means monks. And the term Blessed One is a common term to use to refer to the Buddha. They normally don't transcribe it as the Buddha said this or the Buddha said that. They normally say the Blessed One or the Supremely Awakened One. And the Buddha often refers to himself as the Tathagata. Okay, so it's quite common to say the Blessed One to refer to the Buddha when it is written into this sutra. So the word bhikkhus simply means ordained monks, the direct students of the Buddha. And these are ordained monks. They are called bhikkhus. When they are first ordained, they're usually samaneras. That means they are junior monks. And after a period of up to 5 years, their immediate teacher will then allow them to be fully ordained. And then when they're fully ordained, they can be called bhikkhus. So this is who the Buddha was referring to. And the bhikkhus responded, "Yes, Lord," they replied. And then the Buddha went on to speak. Just one moment, I'm getting some distraction here. Sorry about that. Something on my screen is distracting me. Okay. So then the Blessed One said, "Before my awakening, because while I was still an unawake bodhisattva, it occurred to me." Now let's pause there for a moment. Here, the Buddha was actually talking about the time before he became the Buddha. That's why he says, "Before my awakening." Now, the word awakening is a better word to describe the attainment of this enlightenment. The word enlightenment is not a very good word to use, actually, even though it's the most popular word to use. But the word awakening is a better word, because the word bodhi, the word bodh, means to wake up. To wake up from what? To wake up from the dream of existence, to wake up from our samsaric world, our world where everything is disturbing us and distracting us. So a person who has become enlightened or awakened, he is now aware of all these disturbances and the causes of these disturbances and how it affects us, and they don't get affected. This is an enlightened person. So here the Buddha said, before my awakening, which means while he was still not yet a Buddha, while I was still an unawake bodhisattva. Now the word bodhisattva has very strong meaning. Not anybody can be a bodhisattva. Bodhisattva basically refers to someone who is not yet awakened or not yet enlightened, but it is also referring to a person who has already devoted, right, and vowed to eventually attain enlightenment, vowed to practice diligently until he becomes enlightened. That means such a person would have completely renounced and would never ever go back to the household life. So such a person basically spends his whole life reaching this enlightenment or awakening. So this is a very devoted person, and there are not so many, right? We cannot call ourselves bodhisattva because we're still living in household life. No matter how devoted we are not bodhisattva. There are very few people who qualify as bodhisattva. So the word bodhisattva is one who has already taken the vow to eventually become enlightened or awakened. So here the Buddha was explaining, before he became a Buddha, then he started to distinguish between good thoughts and bad thoughts. Right? So here, good thoughts refer to thoughts that are wholesome, helpful, beneficial, and they lead to wellness and goodness. Whereas bad thoughts are referring to thoughts that are unwholesome. That means they're not good thoughts, not peaceful thoughts. They're harmful. They could be damaging or detrimental to our health, or to our physical health, or our mental health, or also the physical or mental health of others, and lead to even evil or danger. So that's bad thoughts. So before he became a Buddha, he was able to distinguish between those two. Sorry about that. Okay. So he was able to distinguish between those two, and that's the meaning of today's sutra. Right? Two kinds of thoughts, good thoughts and bad thoughts. So he was able to separate, even at that time, he was able to separate between good thoughts and bad thoughts. So those marked in red are the bad thoughts. So he was able to separate the three kinds of bad thoughts classified here: passionate, angry, and violent thoughts. So these are three kinds of bad thoughts. They are separated from three kinds of good thoughts: dispassionate, kind, and peaceful, which are the direct opposite of those three in red. Passion or passionate thoughts refer to thoughts of lust or greed for sensual pleasures. That means wanting to enjoy life by exciting activities, partying, drinking, doing things which stimulate the senses to become excited. So giving in to sensual desires or sensual pleasures. So that's called passion. So the word passion is referring to the lust and the greed for sensual desires or sensual pleasures. Anger or angry thoughts refer to thoughts that lead to ill will. That means thoughts that lead to not very kind, not nice. Right? You want to hurt somebody, harmful to others or to yourself, ill will or hatred. So here anger eventually leads to hatred. Anger, if it is not stopped and allowed to continue, anger eventually leads to hatred. You may be angry with someone, but if you allow that anger to continue and to worsen, after some time, you are not just only angry with that person, you begin to hate that person. So that's what is meant, right? That anger eventually leads to hatred. Anger is imbued with ill will. That means intention to hurt or harm yourself or others. It can also be anger for yourself, right? Just as the opposite of compassion to yourself. So you can also be angry with yourself of things that you didn't go your way, and then you want to hurt yourself. Some people go to the extreme of committing suicide, right? So that's really what happens here. Violent thoughts are thoughts that lead to destruction and cruelty. Very important to realize it's cruelty. Cruel thoughts. Thoughts of really lashing out or hurting yourself and others in a very, very strong way. So that's referred to as violent thoughts. So these are the three categories of bad thoughts being referred to. And the good thoughts are dispassionate, kind, and peaceful. Dispassion is the opposite of passion, but in this case, right, when people are aroused with emotional excitement over pleasures, a person who practices dispassion would be able to abandon the lust, let it go, Any feeling of lusting for something or greed for something or desiring of sensual pleasures, the person can just let it go, detach. Renounce, that means I don't want this. I abandon this. I let it go. I give it up. So this is dispassion. That is the opposite of passion. And kind is referring to, of course, we all know, right? Friendliness, benevolent, compassionate, goodwill, right? Thoughts of goodwill, helping people, doing good for people. So this is kindness. And peaceful, basically the opposite of violent. This is referring to calmness and composure and harmony. You want to live in harmony with other people, then you are considered a peaceful person. A person who does not want to live in harmony with others, that is not a peaceful person. So here it is the meaning of peaceful. So before the Buddha became a Buddha, while he was still unenlightened, he was able to identify what kind of thoughts that are arising in the mind. See, you cannot stop thoughts from arising. For a person who is not enlightened, any thoughts just pop up. We all know that. Can you control every thought that comes to your mind? You can't control the arising, but what you can control is what you do with it afterwards. And this is what the sutra is all about. Being able to identify bad thoughts versus good thoughts, then you are able to decide what to do and how to respond. But you cannot stop bad thoughts from arising sometimes. You know, if you have a friend who then suddenly calls you by a name you don't like, for a moment, at least for a moment, you feel angry. But if you realize that he's such a good friend and maybe he was just joking with you, and then you realize, oh, he was just joking, and then your anger subsides. See? But you can't stop this momentary arising of this anger. Similarly, if you're working in a team and everybody is putting in effort to make things happen, and maybe you are the one who actually put in the most effort, and then your boss comes along and sees somebody else that he likes and start to praise that person and not you. So for a moment, you may feel a little bit of envy. You know, why did the boss praise him? I'm the one doing all the hard work. For a moment, you may feel that. But if you are able to distinguish between good thoughts and bad thoughts, you will not be doing anything harmful to that person or to your boss or to the whole project. You will suddenly realize, maybe the boss just likes that person. And that's why the boss likes to praise that person. Or maybe the boss didn't notice what I did. You know? So therefore, you will realize that afterwards. But you can't stop this momentary arising of this feeling of envy or disappointment, right? So these are bad thoughts that arise. If you don't do something about it, these bad thoughts can actually trigger very unwholesome or undesirable outcome. And people must learn how to control these bad thoughts. So then the Buddha went on to explain about the time when before he was enlightened. He says, when I dwelt, thus watchful, alert, and vigilant, a passionate thought arose in me. Okay, now let's pause there for a moment. Look at the word dwelt. What is the meaning of dwelt? In the sutra, the word dwelt here refers to mental abiding, right? Dwelt normally refers to dwelling. You live in a place, so you dwell in that place. But here it's talking about your mind, right? This is the house of your thoughts. It houses all your thoughts. So dwelt here refers to thinking, the process of abiding in your thoughts, right? Having thoughts and being aware of it, that is what dwelt here means. And then watchful. What does watchful mean? Watchful means being diligent and paying attention to the thoughts. Pay attention to. That's what watchful means. And alert. Alert simply means you are having a clear mind of what can happen, the cause and the effect. You are alert that good thoughts can lead to good outcome, bad thoughts can lead to bad outcome. That is being alert. And you're ardent and you have a attitude of anticipatory and keenly observant of the thoughts. So that is really what being alert means. Being vigilant really then is you now want to do something about it. You are resolute. You have a desire to want to do something about it, and it's a purposeful way of treating your thoughts. You now want to either accept it or reject it. So this is really what vigilant means. Right? It's the purposeful response to thoughts arising. And then he says, then I recognize a passionate thought has arisen in me. This can lead to my own harm, to others' harm, and to the harm of both. Mute them. Can people joining us on Zoom please mute your microphone? All right. Okay. So here, my own harm and to others' harm and to the harm of both. That means sometimes if we dwell in these bad thoughts, it can hurt ourselves, it can hurt others, or it can hurt both of us, right? And it obstructs intelligence. And here intelligence refers to the process that leads to wisdom. That means it prevents us from becoming wise if we dwell in these bad thoughts. And it favors destructiveness and leads us away from Nibbana, enlightenment. That means as a bodhisattva, he was very clear-minded about this. He knows that if he dwells in these unwholesome thoughts, he will not become enlightened. So he was very watchful, alert, and vigilant about them. So here, the first part is about passionate thoughts. So when I considered this lead to my own harm, it subsided in me. So that means he is actually being alert to the cause and effect, that if he dwell in that thoughts, it can lead to an outcome that hurts himself. And by letting it go, then he is able to let that thought subside and the thought will no longer disturb him. See, when we get bad thoughts arising in our mind, if we start to dwell in it, we start to think about it, we start to reflect on it, we start to challenge it, we start to do something about these bad thoughts, no matter what happens, it can lead us to be attached to the bad thoughts. So here he has learned how to let it go, right? And by letting it go, it's subsided. So these bad thoughts can go away. So in other words, you cannot will a thought to go away, but you can actually ignore it, abandon it, and let it go, and the bad thought can subside. That's how it works. You can't fight bad thoughts, okay? But you can actually just let it go and ignore it. And then when he considered this lead to others' harm, it subsided in me. And when he considered this leads to the harm of both, it subsided in me. So he was being very watchful, alert, and vigilant about every thought that arises and considering how it hurts himself, others, or both. Then when I considered these thoughts obstruct intelligence, favor destructiveness, lead me away from Nibbana, they subsided in me. So he realized that these bad thoughts, if he dwell in them, they actually will prevent him from attaining his, from succeeding in his vow to become enlightened. And that's what is meant here, right? So therefore, every passionate thought that arose in me now, as I mentioned before, right? Passionate thoughts are thoughts of desire, lust, and greed. Every passionate thought that arose in me, I did not accept it. I rejected it and I eliminated it. Now, let's take a look at these important terms, what they mean. Did not accept. Here it meant not to dwell upon it, not to rethink it, not to go back and reflect on it. In other words, if somebody gives you something and you don't accept it, you just stand back and just say, no, thank you. Then you won't be holding on to it. You won't be attached to it. So basically, it's not accepting. You're not fighting it. Realize, do not fight thoughts. The more you try to fight a thought, it becomes a conflict. And when it is in a conflict, that thought will keep hounding you. That's the point. So don't fight any thought. Just don't accept it. Let it go so that you don't cling on to it. You don't attach to it. When you begin to fight something, you are actually attaching yourself to it, even though you don't want it, but that conflict leads to attachment. So do not accept it, do not dwell upon it, do not reflect on it or recollect it. And the next one, rejected. Now, again, this is not the conflict of fighting. This is really just ignoring. Rejected is ignoring. Turn your back on it and walk away. If somebody came up to you and wanted to give you something, it may or may not be a good thing, but just wanted to give you something, and maybe it's a stranger, right? It's not a good friend. You don't know what it is all about, and you don't like it, you don't want it. Somebody wants to give you something, and you just turn your back and walk away. Then you will not be clinging on to it. You will have nothing to do with what he wants to give you. Similarly, when these bad thoughts arise, this word rejected simply means you just ignore it, turn your back on it and walk away. Let it go. Letting it go. That is what rejected means. It's not rejected in a conflict way. Right? You're not fighting it. Eliminate, again, you're not trying to remove it. You cannot remove thought. You can only abandon it, let it go. So eliminate it. Eliminate here simply means releasing the thoughts and say, never mind, let it go. So I'll give you a simple everyday example. If you were in a house alone, and the doors are locked, and you are just sitting there peacefully. Let's say you want to meditate and you don't want to do anything. And then some stranger that you don't know comes along and knocks at the door. They press the doorbell, ding dong. Now, if you just ignore it and you don't pay attention to it, that person might keep pressing the bell, ding dong, a few times. But after a few times, if nobody is responding to him, most likely he will just go away. In the same way, when you have bad thoughts arising, you just let it go. You don't fight it. You don't respond to it. You just turn your back on it, ignore it, and go and continue with whatever you are focusing on. Whereas if some stranger was pressing on your doorbell, and if you were in conflict, you want to fight that person trying to come in by shouting at him, go away, go away. Let's say he's a door-to-door salesman, and you start shouting to him, go away, go away. Then you are creating a conflict, and that conflict can cause your mind to enter into a very negative state, right? An unwholesome state. So don't fight it. Just turn your back on it, ignore it, let it go, right? So therefore, if you're in your house alone and somebody presses the doorbell, some stranger or door-to-door salesman, just be silent and let it go, ignore it, right? So this is what was meant by that, okay? Did not accept, and rejected and eliminated. Then the Buddha went on to say the same thing about angry thoughts, right? So basically, it is those three categories, right? It is the category of passionate thoughts, the category of angry thoughts, and then the third category of, we come to that. So this is the second category, and the rest of it basically are talking about the same thing. So the third category are cruel thoughts. So the sutra, there are many repetitions. So there is a repeated passage here that is found on the first passionate thought. So this was dropped, but the Punnaji did not include the text here because it makes it very lengthy. That's why Bhante Punnaji simplified it, because this is repetitive, referring to the same process. So in the same way, there is also cruel thoughts, and the same thing, did not accept, rejected it, and eliminated it. Okay. So those three are passion, anger, and violence. Thoughts of passion, thoughts of anger, thoughts of violence. Right? I already discussed this earlier on. And then the Buddha went on to talk to the monks and explain, because whatever a bhikkhu frequently thinks and ponders over, the mind will be inclined towards it. This is exactly what I mentioned earlier. When a thought arises, and if you begin to think about it, ponder it, consider it, reflect upon it, recollect it, remember it, it actually causes your mind to become attached towards it. Inclined towards it simply means your mind becomes attached to those thoughts. So the more you think about something, the more your mind attaches to it. Even if you're thinking of wanting to get rid of it, the fact that you are thinking of getting rid of it, that act, that mental act of thinking of getting rid of something causes you to link onto it or attach to it, right? So the best way to get rid of something that arises in your mind is to let it go, not to think about it, ponder it, recollect it, and consider, oh, this is not good, and if I do it, and it will lead to this and this and that and that. If you continue to think like that, you become too attached to it. So if he frequently thinks and ponders the same thing over passionate thoughts, right, he has abandoned dispassion. That means a person who considers thoughts of lust, greed, or sensual pleasures, he has basically abandoned dispassion. Right? Dispassion is letting go, giving it all up. So that means these two cannot coexist. If you start to consider passionate thoughts, you have abandoned dispassion. And similarly, right, this is again repetitive, and therefore, similarly, angry thoughts abandon kindness. If you consider angry thoughts, you abandon kindness. And cruel thoughts, you abandon peacefulness. And therefore, the process of dispassion, kind, and peaceful. Right? Then the Buddha went on to say, this way I saw the danger, the futility, and the confusion in unwholesome mental states. So here the Buddha stated, when he was able to distinguish and differentiate between good thoughts and bad thoughts, then he was able to see that these bad thoughts have danger, they are futile, and they can be confusing, unwholesome mental states. And therefore, he saw the advantage and the benefit of cultivating wholesome mental states. As I dwelt thus, watchful, alert, and vigilant, a thought of renunciation arose in me. Right? So therefore, renunciation is referring to dispassion. As I dwelt watchful, alert, and vigilant, and the thought of renunciation arose. Then I recognized this thought of renunciation has risen in me. This does not lead me to my own harm, to others' harm, or to the harm of both. So this is again the same thing, that he realizes that it will not hurt himself and others. It promotes intelligence, which leads to wisdom. It supports constructiveness. Here, constructiveness means the development, a person developing himself, becoming a better person, purifying his mind, purifying his actions, cultivating good morality. That is really what constructiveness is about. Positive construction, constructiveness, development. And this eventually leads to Nibbana. And if I think and ponder over this thought, which means the thought of renunciation, for one night or for one day, or even for a night and a day, I see no danger. That means realizing that these renunciation, thoughts of renunciation, thoughts of dispassion is helpful and carries no danger, then it's good to dwell in them. Okay, because if you are able to accept these good thoughts, then you don't overthink them. See, the trouble with overthinking is that trying to analyze, don't analyze thoughts, because when you try to analyze thoughts, that's what's meant by excessive thinking. So here, excessive thinking refers to analyzing thoughts, right? You analyze until you become paralyzed. That's really what it is. Your mind becomes paralyzed if you try to analyze thoughts. Nobody can really analyze thoughts. Likewise, nobody can analyze dreams, because dreams are just another kind of thoughts that arise when you are asleep or half asleep. Nobody can really analyze them, but people can only have intelligent guess. But still, it's guessing. Nobody really knows. So excessive thinking, right? Pondering, it will tire my body. And when the body is tired, the mind becomes tired. And when the mind is tired, it is far from tranquility. which means you will not be peaceful. So don't try to analyze thoughts. So I steadied my mind internally. The mind means just calm down. Don't analyze the thoughts. Quieten it. Just relax, right? And brought it to a state of tranquility and stillness. Right? Why is that? So in order to prevent the mind being disturbed with overthinking, excessive thinking, analyzing thoughts. That's really what this is about. So the rest is repetition. Earlier on, we spoke about dispassion. Now it's kindness. So what you see on the screen in lighter color, these are basically repetitions. So I won't repeat them. And all these are repetition. We can skip through them because this is the third type of thoughts talking about peacefulness. It's just repetitive, repeating the same thing. So I will just skip through it. All this excessive thinking, that is also, that is also repeating. So we'll skip through all these repetition. Now we come to this part. Having gone thus far, I had only to be aware that those good thoughts were going on in my mind. Having gone this thus far means now he has realized he has progressed in his ability to firstly identify good thoughts from bad thoughts, being able to let go the bad thoughts and embrace the good thoughts without overthinking it, without trying to analyze it. Now he has come this far. So having gone this far, I had only to be aware that these good thoughts were going on in my mind. That means now if he practiced this continuously, the only thing he will be dwelling with are good thoughts. As soon as bad thoughts arise, he just lets it go. When good thoughts arise, he will just accept it, right? And without excessive thinking, over analyzing the thoughts. Okay, this is referring to the process where you purify your mind, purification of mind. So this process is about purification of mind. And then the Buddha went on to explain before he became enlightened, that he realized, I realized my vigilant practice has progressed. My unremitting introspective attention was established in me. My body was relaxed and comfortable, and my mind was happy, tranquil, and unified. So therefore, he recognized that this is good practice. Right? This vigilant practice leads to his progress towards enlightenment, towards Nibbana. And unremitting introspective attention means he continues to bring his attention inwards to observe how he is experiencing it. In other words, observing how the body changes, how the feelings arise, how his emotions are arising, and how these thoughts are starting to pop up, right? So he becomes aware of this. And this allows him to relax, right? And become more comfortable, happy, tranquil, and unified. I'll explain unified later on. It's a very important part of becoming enlightened, okay? The unified is an important thing. I'll come to that in a moment. And this last part, in this way, withdrawn from passionate thoughts, withdrawn from evil thoughts, I entered upon the first jhana with observation, inference, experiencing joy and comfort based on mental equilibrium. Ultimately, I came to realize that birth is ended, lived is the holy life, done is what has to be done, and no more is the continuity of existence. Now, this passage is quite deep. I will explain in details subsequently. Let's finish off with the sutra. So we just park this aside. I'll come back to this passage in details after we go through the rest of the sutra. There's only just one more page left, or a couple of more paragraphs left, okay? Because this particular paragraph here, this passage, refers to the process that leads to enlightenment. It's a very, this is quite a deep part. I will explain that in later on. Just park this aside. Moving on, the last slide here on this sutra. So, because the safe and good path to be traveled joyfully has been reopened by me, the wrong path has been closed off. Now, what the Buddha meant here is that what he has taught is safe and good, and he has offered it to his students, right? Therefore, they should practice it joyfully. Travel joyfully is practicing it joyfully. And what is not good for them, he has put it away, and therefore they don't have to worry about that. This safe and good path is referring to the way leading, the way of the Bodhisattva leading to Nibbana, awakening or enlightenment. So that is the meaning of safe and good path. So finally, the Buddha concluded, when a teacher who seeks your welfare, he was talking to the monks, what a teacher who seeks your welfare and has compassion for you can do, that I have done for you. Because, so the Buddha really meant that he has tried his best, that he was there to for the benefit of his students, for the benefit of his disciples, all the monks, and he did it out of compassion for them, and he has done it. Basically, what the Buddha was trying to say to them is the rest is up to them. You have learned a good lesson. Now it's up to you to put that lesson into practice. So that's what the Buddha really meant. Right? That I have done for you, meaning he can do no more. He can only teach you. Whether or not you benefit from it is up to you to practice. That's really what he was saying to the bhikkhus, to the monks. And with that, he ended this sutra. There are these roots of trees, these empty huts. Because meditate, do not delay, or else you will regret it later. This is my advice to you. That was his final advice. Now, roots of trees and empty huts is referring to places of seclusion. When the Buddha tells people to meditate, he tells them, you go to the forest and sit on the roots of the tree. That means you have the protection of the tree, but you are not distracted by people in the town. See, go to the forest, sit on the roots of trees, or go to an empty hut where there's no one else. Empty hut refers to going to a place or a room or a hut, secluded. Other people are not there. No one is there to disturb you. That is really what the Buddha meant when he mentioned roots of trees and empty huts. And then he advised them, you must meditate, because meditation is the way to purify the mind. And meditation can help you differentiate between these good thoughts and bad thoughts. Right? And his advice is, do not delay. The same advice I would like to offer to anyone listening in. If you have not started a process of meditation, do that. Find a good teacher. There are many good teachers around. There are many teachers around. You got to look around and find a good teacher and start to meditate. Don't delay if you really want to benefit from the teachings of the Buddha. And so with that, the sutra is ended, and that was the Blessed One's utterance. The bhikkhus were delighted and inspired by what the Blessed One said. And that's the end of that sutra. Okay, so let's take a look at that last part there. I mentioned to we park it aside. Now let's take a look at it. This is the process of attainment of enlightenment, the process that leads to enlightenment or Buddhahood. Okay, and that was the passage we parked aside. So let's take a look at it step by step. It says, in this way, withdrawn from passionate thoughts, withdrawn from evil thoughts. Right? So what does it mean by withdrawn from passionate thoughts, withdrawn from evil thoughts? This is really the process which we call the abandonment of the 5 hindrances. Because these, when it comes to meditation, then these thoughts are considered to be hindrances. They hinder you from succeeding in your meditation. And there are 5 categories of these hindrances, right? So This withdrawn from passionate thoughts, withdrawn from evil thoughts, are basically the process of abandonment of the 5 hindrances. Now, I will explain 5 hindrances in the next slide. Right? So bear in mind, this is really giving up those 5 categories of thoughts that disturb us, that hinder us from succeeding in our meditation. And then the next part, having abandoned the 5 hindrances, and I entered upon the first jhana with observation, inference, joy, comfort, mental equilibrium. Now, the first jhana is a very high state of attainment in meditation. Like some people call it absorption. My teacher calls it ecstasy. I will talk about that in a moment too. And then, in order to enter into this into this first jhana, you need to go through the experience of these 5 elements or 5 constituents of jhana. These 5 constituents are called jhanangas. So you need to experience these 5 constituents in order for you to experience jhana. If these 5 constituents are not there, then you are not experiencing jhana. Right? So we have to be careful. So I'll explain that again also later on about these 5 constituents of jhana: observation, inference, joy, comfort, and mental equilibrium. Okay. And then the last part here, ultimately, I came to realize that birth is ended, lived is the holy life, done is what has to be done, and no more is the continuity of existence. Birth is ended. This is a very important concept. If we are not enlightened, when we die, we will be reborn. That's why birth is ended, meaning when you have reached enlightenment, when you have become an enlightened being, then you will not be reborn again. I'll explain that further on also. Okay. And no more is the continuity of existence. Right? I'll explain later on. So this is really what it means. To become enlightened means you have put an end to rebirth. You will not be reborn. And your existence has, when you die, your existence has ended. It does not continue anymore. Otherwise, if we are unenlightened, when we die, we will be reborn. Now, the person who is reborn is not the same person as the one who has died, but at the same time, it is not different. The essence is not different. It is the consciousness that is passed on life after life through rebirth. Okay. Bear in mind, rebirth concept is not the same as what other people call reincarnation. That's a different concept, right? I won't dwell too much into it. Maybe I'll just briefly talk about it later on. But here it's talking about the ending of rebirth and no longer continuity of existence. Okay, so before we become enlightened, what we are experiencing is called samsaric life, or what is around us, we call it samsara. Samsara is a Sanskrit as well as a Pali term, same spelling, and that refers to this cycle of death and rebirth, where we continuously, invariably experience all kinds of pain and suffering life after life. That's why when they say when a person becomes enlightened, he has put an end to all suffering, meaning he no longer is reborn into a samsaric world where he will continue to suffer. And a person who is still alive after becoming enlightened, his mind is so purified that it is no longer disturbed by emotions. And when the mind is purified and not disturbed by emotion, that mind cannot experience suffering anymore. The reason we experience suffering is because our mind continuously experiences emotional arousals. And it is this emotional arousal that leads us to experience suffering. Something nice, we experience something nice, we begin to like it, and then we begin to have some lust or desire for the pleasures, a pleasant experience. When something unpleasant arises and we don't like it, and we begin to feel we want to get rid of it, right? And if we can't get rid of it, we become angry and maybe hateful towards it. So all these are emotional arousals. And all this leads to all kinds of suffering. An arahant, a person who has become enlightened, when he is experiencing something that may be pleasurable, he is neutral towards it. He just backs it off and says, okay, it's nice, but I don't greed for it. I don't lust for it. I don't need to go after it. And if he experiences something that is unpleasant, maybe he has some pain in the body, he has some sickness that is unpleasant, he knows that this is just a natural process. I am not hurt by it mentally, right? So whereas the rest of us, when we experience pain, we experience illness, our mind becomes hurt by it. Oh, I'm getting sick today. I don't want to go to work, because we are emotional. All that is emotional reaction. An enlightened person does not have any kind of emotional reaction. This is mentioned very clearly in the Four Noble Truths. Okay, so living in this samsaric world, we continuously, invariably experience pain and suffering. And then when we die, we will be reborn back into this samsaric world and continue the process of experiencing pain and suffering life after life until we are able to become enlightened. Once we become enlightened, we have freed ourselves from this experience of suffering because we have completely freed ourselves from emotional reaction. That's really what it means to become enlightened. Okay, and this attainment of enlightenment will end your rebirth, ending the process of rebirth. You will no longer be reborn into a world of suffering, no longer be reborn into samsara. Now, I mentioned about the 5 hindrances. Right? These are the 5 hindrances shown here graphically, so you can see and see it a little bit more interesting way. But let's look at the actual 5 hindrances that are mentioned. Right? The first is kama chanda. This is when we have a wish or a desire for something that is pleasant. When we experience pleasures, we want more of it. Wanting it, liking this pleasurable experience, that is kama chanda. It doesn't mean you become crazy for it, but if you like it so much, so deeply, you can become crazy for it. And then it gets out of control. You become an addicted to it. So here, whenever you wish or desire for something that is pleasant, let's say you have tasted your neighbor's cooking, adobo. Your neighbor is very good at cooking adobo and invited you over for a meal. And you experience that and say, oh, wow, his adobo is so tasty. And then you constantly want to go to his house and eat more. And maybe you call him on the phone or send him a text. Hey, when are you making adobo? Can I come over? That is your wish and desire for pleasures. And that eventually can lead to disappointments and suffering. Because if he happens to be in a foul mood on that day and he cooks an adobo, cooking has to do with love. When a person is in good mood and feels good, his cooking tends to taste better. But when a person is in a foul mood or experience something unhappy, whatever he cooks usually doesn't come out so well. So you are invited to go and eat another round of adobo, and then you suddenly taste that, oh, it's not so nice. And then you get disappointed. And then you get all kinds of thoughts coming in your head. All that is part and parcel of this suffering we're talking about, this dukkha. So kama chanda is this desire and wish for pleasures and can lead to suffering. Next is the opposite of it, vyapada or bhyapada. It's ill will or anger or hatred towards these pleasures. That means something unpleasant you don't want. You want to get rid of it. And you get angry over it. Ill will turns into anger. Anger turns into hatred. Ill will simply means you just want to get rid of it. Right? You want to remove it. But if you try to remove something and you can't remove it and it keeps coming at you, you start to get angry over it. Now, if you continue to get angry over it and it keeps coming towards you, eventually you hate it, right? It becomes hateful. And therefore, it all leads to various kinds of suffering. And this is exactly what every single one of us around this whole world has experienced. during the beginning of 2020, when COVID pandemic started. It was something nobody wanted. And, you know, we wanted to get rid of it. And people were wishing, oh, it'll go away in a few months, but it didn't go away. Even until today, we still have people, suffering from COVID. So even I, after my last trip here in July, when I went home, I caught COVID. Of all the people in the world, I got it from my dentist. What happened is when I arrived home on a Monday, I allowed 2 days. So Wednesday morning, I tested negative. Then I had a toothache. So I called up my dentist. He said, okay, come over. So I went to see my dentist, my regular dentist, actually. So I went there. Of course, in the dentist place, you take off your mask. I was there without the mask the whole afternoon at the dentist place. Then on Friday morning, I started to get symptoms. My nose was running like crazy. I normally don't get running nose. And then I was sneezing. I never sneeze. And it was sneezing nonstop. At first, I didn't pay attention. I thought, oh, maybe I didn't sleep very well. So I allowed it to go on for a day or two. By Saturday night, it wasn't going so well. So Sunday morning, I quickly bought the self-test. Sunday morning, I tested positive. So I knew I must have caught it from the dentist because the symptoms showed up 2 days after I went to the dentist without my mask on. Now, my experience at that time is I realized, oh, it is something I don't want, but at the same time, I don't want to get angry over it. And I went into quarantine. But, you know, sometimes life throws you a curveball. Right? If you learn to rock and roll with it, you're going to have a ball. And I went into quarantine with my laptop, my computer, plenty of books, locked myself in my library room for 2 weeks. And I enjoyed myself reading, going online, searching for information, and meditating. I had very peaceful experience for 2 weeks. That was wonderful. Like I said, life throws you a curveball and infects you with COVID. If you learn to rock and roll with it, you're going to have a ball. So I enjoyed myself for 2 weeks. How many people said they enjoyed themselves under quarantine, you know? Right now, a very good friend of mine, his daughter also just caught COVID, and she's now in quarantine. And she's telling her father she's actually enjoying it because she was working so hard in the office, getting so stressed. Now she has the time to sleep in as she wished and do whatever she wants on the internet. And she's really having a good time. So this is really what it is. Don't fight it. Don't get angry with something you don't like. Learn to roll with it, flow with it, right? So when it is something unpleasant that you don't like, don't fight it, because when you fight it, it hurts you. That fight becomes a conflict. That conflict becomes suffering. And then the third one is tina mida, third type of hindrances, meaning you become lazy, you become lethargic, you become sluggish, you become drowsy. This does not necessarily mean all is laziness, but it could also mean that you are not attending well to your own physical well-being. You don't sleep enough, so you often get sleepy and you become lethargic. If you eat too much, overeating can lead you to lethargy and drowsiness. And this tina mida is often translated as sloth and torpor. But basically, it just means that you're slow moving, you're feeling drowsy, sleepy, and lazy, not wanting to get things done. And that can also bring you hurt, harm, and suffering. And it becomes a hindrance to your meditation practice. The fourth one is uddhacca kukucca, which is basically the opposite of tina mida. This is really you become agitated. You become restless, you become anxious, anxiety, worry, and stressful. So all this is uddhacca kukucca. Again, all this can be hindrance to your meditation practice. And finally, the fourth one, vicikicca, often translated as skeptical doubt. And some people explain it as doubt over the Dhamma. No, that is not what it really means. Vicikicca means vacillation, cognitive dissonance, the mind being torn between two kinds of thoughts. I'm going to come to that in a moment. I will explain a bit more. It's not about doubt. It can lead to doubt, but it is not about doubt. And some people explain it as skeptical doubt over the Dhamma, but that's not necessarily the case. Vicikicca is not doubt. It is really the mind being torn, right? So let's come to that in a moment, what vicikicca means in a moment, okay? So these 5 hindrances prevent you from attaining meditation success. And one of the most important successful attainment in meditation is the experience of jhana. And there are these 5 constituents that make up the experience of jhana. Vitakka, which is conceptual inferences, that means you're coming to a conclusion, a rational deduction or recollection. Vichara, which is actually conceptual inquiry, right? Observing, inquiring, examining. These are referring to thoughts arising. And then piti. Piti is often translated as rapture, but it can also mean cognitive satisfaction, cognitive contentment, meaning the mind is peaceful and the mind is contented and not desirous of things. The mind is still peaceful, satisfied. So the mind is not searching for something that is missing. The mind is peaceful, at peace. So when the mind is at peace, the mind is happy, but not happy in a pleasurable sense, but happy in a sense of contentment, that kind of happiness. Some people call this blissfulness. I think that is also a good word, blissful. You feel contented and peacefully happy, blissful, okay? That's piti, often translated as rapture, but the word rapture is not necessarily very good because rapture suggests some excitement. You know, you're happy because of some excitement. There is no excitement. The mind is contented, no excitement, nothing missing. Then the fourth constituent is sukha, and this refers to the body. Basically, it's a physical comfort, right? And it's a state of complete relaxation, means the body is completely relaxed, free from body tensions, and resulting from the absence of any tension that arouse your emotions. You see, as soon as your body experiences any kind of tension, that experience of tension sends signal to the brain, and the brain trigger the amygdala to react, and that releases stress hormone. So tensions in the body can cause you to feel stress, right? And stress can lead to even stronger tension. So in other words, if you're doing something and you're physically affected by it, let's say something knocks onto you, at that point, it is not a stress yet, but something knocks into you, and that causes some tensions in that part of the body. And if you don't learn to relax and you get excited over it, that triggers a chain reaction, and the amygdala begins to release stress hormone, and then you become stressed over it. So that physical tension turns into stress. In this case, it's free of that, right? So you learn how to be physically relaxed. The body tensions are released. So that is sukha. And finally, the fifth one is ekagata. This is where the word unified has to come in, okay? We have two minds, the thinking mind and the emotional mind. The thinking mind is the mind that can choose what it wants, right? But of course, thoughts do arise, but the thinking mind is able to separate one from the other. And that is what that sutra was all about. The Buddha was talking about how he's able to be aware with his thinking mind. Good thoughts, bad thoughts, can choose between them and select only to look into good thoughts and just let the bad thoughts go. So that is the thinking mind. There is an emotional mind where thoughts just pop up and it arouses chain reaction in the body. It arouses emotional thoughts. Emotional thoughts lead you to want to do something. If it is something pleasant, you want more of it. If it is something unpleasant, you want to fight against it or get rid of it. That is an emotional thought. So you have these two kinds of things in your mind. When your ability to choose good thoughts is in conflict with your emotional thoughts arising, driving you to want to react, they pull in opposite direction. So your thinking mind, your reasoning, and your feeling, your emotional feeling starts to pull in opposite direction. That is called vicikicca. And that means you will not have peace of mind. Here, ekagata means the two are no longer fighting. They are behaving in a unified way, in unison, moving together, flowing with your thinking mind, basically. That means the emotional mind has stopped flowing with the thinking mind. That means only your thinking mind is able to think, and it is not disturbed by emotional mind anymore. That's why it's called stillness of mind, absence of vicikicca, cognitive dissonance, that is making it completely free from this mental conflict between affective activity, which is emotional activity, and cognitive activity, which is your intellect, your thinking mind, and these two become unified. So the word unified means these two minds become one, unification of mind. And when these 5 constituents are present in you during that meditation process, when you are deep in meditation, then you will be experiencing jhana. But before that happens, you have to get rid of the 5 hindrances. That means you have to abandon the 5 hindrances before you reach that state, and these 5 constituents become present, then you will experience jhana. Okay, so that's what that means. Cognitive dissonance. Right? First, it is feeling versus reasoning. One part of the mind is an emotional mind, right? And that's called citta in Pali. That is the affective process, your feeling, emotional feeling. The other part of the mind is the thinking mind, the cognitive process, the intellect, and that is your reasoning, your ability to reason right from wrong, good from bad. They are pulling in opposite direction. Feeling and reasoning pulling in opposite direction. We are always experiencing this. Whenever we come across a situation, we have to make a decision. There is always one part of us that is emotional and say, I like to do this. But there's another part of us which is reasoning, rational, say, this is the right thing to do, this is not the right thing to do. A lot of young couples living with their parents will experience that. A young man living with his parents, married with a woman. I'm not saying we are generalizing everything, but it is quite common that very often the mother-in-law and the daughter-in-law don't get along. And when they have a conflict, the poor man is caught in between. In between who is actually right or wrong, and in between his love for his wife or his love for his mother. So he's really caught between seeing the reality of who is right, who is wrong, that is the reasoning part, and his love for one or the other. I'm not saying people are like that, but there are some people who love their wife more than their mother after they get married. And there are also people who continue to love their mother more than anyone else, even after they get married. You know, so it depends on the individual. But the point is that your love for your partner or your mother is now in conflict with your ability to reason out who is right, who is wrong. The person you happen to love more happens to be wrong, but you might take side with the one you love more. So when these two are pulling in the opposite direction, that is called vicikicca, cognitive dissonance. The psychological term is called cognitive dissonance. One invariably reacts according to feeling, how you feel with it. And then after reacting according to emotionally charged decisions, you start to use your thinking brain to make clever reasoning why you're doing that, why you chose that. It happens to all of us. Right? So that is vicikicca. Okay. Now we are constantly experiencing all kinds of stress, and that is really what is hurting us, the suffering we experience in life. I covered this last week, so I just quickly run through it. Environmental activities bombard our senses, putting pressure on us. Circumstances keep changing, unpredictable. People having demands on us, and we have to meet deadlines and schedules, draining our energy resources, and obstacles, problems, difficulties, they arise, and they disturb and hinder our planned activities, disrupting our peace. All this leads to a perception of threats or conflict. And this is what the mind goes through. We covered this last week, but I'll just quickly run through it. Vicious cycle of emotions. Things are happening around us, but because of all these disturbances, our mind tends to interpret things with threats. perception of threat or conflict. And if we do that, this interpretation of circumstances to be of threat or conflict, it arouses emotions. And when emotions are aroused, it releases stress hormone and disturbs the body. And therefore, we will experience what is called stress reaction. And when that happens, it starts to disturb the mind. And this disturbance of the mind is this mental disturbance or distress, and leads us to behave in habitual way. That we have certain habits when we become emotional. And that these are all the things that lead to our emotional reactions. If at this point in time we don't learn to tame it, it can get out of control. When it gets out of control, it leads to depression. Right? And especially when we begin to cling on to it, it feeds the emotion with this mental proliferation, right? And it gets out of control. So what can we do about it? If we want to be calm, we got to learn to get rid of this emotional chain reaction. We got to stop this chain reaction. And stopping this chain reaction goes back to the beginning of the whole process, the way we interpret our circumstances. So whenever anything happens, the way we interpret our circumstances, if we can change our interpretation, choosing good thoughts over bad thoughts, we can tame our emotions. And here in this sutra, the Buddha already explained to us the process where we are able to identify good thoughts from bad thoughts. Once you are able to identify them and be clear about how they affect you, the good thoughts and the bad thoughts, it's quite easy for you to decide what to choose. But if you are allowing your emotions to take control, then you can't choose. So if you're able to identify good thoughts from bad thoughts and be able to choose the good thoughts and let go the bad thoughts, you can change the way you interpret your circumstances. Just like when we are hit by coronavirus and then we end up going into quarantine, we can get angry and say, why is this happening to me? I want to go out and go swimming with my buddies or go watching a movie with my friends. Why do I have to quarantine for 2 weeks? And then we get emotional all over it. Like, so if we learn to let go the bad thoughts and just focus on the good thoughts and do something about it, we can tame our emotions. So if we're able to tame our emotions, we can actually put a stop to this chain reaction, the vicious cycle of emotions, by being able to stop this stress reaction from happening. And the first thing we do is to be aware of bodily changes. Once we are aware, we are now stressed, the body is changing, we can do something about it because we realize we are being stressed. We can choose, we can practice this 3-step self-compassion: pause, relax, and think. It is when we are not aware of it that it gets out of control. So when we are aware of it, we can begin to choose our thoughts. By choosing good thoughts over bad thoughts, we can change the way we interpret our circumstances, change our interpretations, and choosing good thoughts. Then we are no longer perceiving the circumstances to be of threat or conflict. We can perceive peace and harmony. Instead of thinking, oh, this coronavirus is affecting me, you think, oh, this is a wonderful opportunity to just relax and do the stuff that I have never had a chance to do, never had time to do. Now I got 2 weeks sitting in quarantine. I can do all these wonderful things. That's peace and harmony. And by doing that, you're no longer arousing your emotions. You are actually transforming vicious cycle of emotions into virtuous cycle of composure. You're no longer letting your emotions get aroused so easily. You have emotional composure. And with emotional composure, it leads to bodily comfort. And with bodily comfort, then you begin to experience a good feeling in you. And then you start to have purposeful, wholesome response to whatever is happening to you. And that leads you to wellness, comfort, peace, tranquility, and happiness, right? So choosing good thoughts is so important. And first practice this 3-step self-compassion. When thoughts arise, bad thoughts, good thoughts or bad thoughts, they arise and you're a bit confused. Maybe you're experiencing vicikicca, cognitive dissonance. You're not sure which is good thoughts, which is bad thoughts. So what do? The first thing is pause. Don't react. Just pause for a moment. Allow this emotional excitement to calm down, anxiety to calm down, your hormonal reactions in the body to subside. And then do something to just relax first. It's only with a relaxed body can you have a calm mind. If the body is not relaxed, the mind cannot be calm. So do something to relax the body. Take deep breaths, relax the body, consciously compose the mind to respond. And then in your response, you can choose good thoughts from bad thoughts. Purposefully focus on wholesome and beneficial response to the problem, choosing good thoughts from bad thoughts. This is the 3-step self-compassion. So finally, in conclusion, this is really Buddhist psychotherapy, how to purify our thoughts and action. This is the simple part, calming ourselves first. Before you can purify, you need to be calm and still. So pay attention to thoughts arising. Be watchful, alert, and vigilant. I have already explained those earlier on, right, of your thoughts. And prefer thoughts of dispassion, kindness, and peace, choosing the good thoughts. And then learn and practice this 3-step self-compassion. Pause before any reaction. Relax the body with mindfulness of breathing. And then compose the mind and purposefully focus on wholesome and beneficial thoughts in response to whatever is going on. This is how you can calm yourself down and experience emotional composure, not emotional arousal, and experience peace of mind and being able to choose good thoughts over bad thoughts and wise decisions. Right? So with that, I end this presentation. I hope it has been helpful. So I hope you've benefited from it. And I'm going to give you some links to download. So take a snapshot of these links you can download. The sutra by the Punnaji that I have been using. So that was shown in the beginning. And then also the slides that I've shown in today's presentation, WP slides-3. So you can download all the slides that I have shown in this presentation today.